Welcome to Vantage USA. We are coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Behind me is the Washington Monument. It's countdown time here. Just a short while from now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be landing in the United States. He will touch down at the Andrews Air Base in Maryland. From there, he will leave for New York. This is the first leg of this all-important visit. The Prime Minister has some meetings lined up. One of them is with Elon Musk. So lots to watch out for in New York. The second leg of the trip is here in Washington, D.C. Modi will meet President Biden. He will attend a state dinner. It's a big honor for visiting leaders in the U.S. All in all, things are looking good for India and America. But some usual suspects are not happy. They're trying hard to sabotage this visit, to derail this important relationship. We'll tell you who they are and what their plan is. Also, what is the history of this relationship? India was twice sanctioned by the United States in the last century. How did sanctions turn to state visits? We'll answer all of that on today's show. But first, the headlines. Russia launches air attacks across Ukraine. Kiev says its air force shot down 32 of 35 drones. Ukraine warns that the biggest blow in its counteroffensive is yet to come. Moscow threatens retaliation if West-supplied weapons are used by Ukraine to strike Crimea. Crisis at Pakistan fails to secure supply of liquefied natural gas. This was their first attempt to do so in about a year. They floated a tender to purchase 6 shipments, but no companies responded. China resumes imports of Taiwanese sugar apples despite rising tensions. Beijing had imposed a ban in 2021 over biosafety fears. China has been cutting imports of Taiwanese fruits and seafood over the past 2 years. Big setback for controversial influencer Andrew Tate. He's charged with rape, human trafficking and forming an organized crime group. Andrew Tate was first arrested in Romania last December along with his brother. And racism in football rears its ugly head again. New Zealand's football team abandoned a friendly match against Qatar. The Kiwis accused a Qatari player of racially abusing defender Michael Boxall. New Zealand did not play the second half after the referee refused to take action. For at least the next 24 hours, all the action will be in New York. It's International Yoga Day tomorrow, and India has planned a mega event. Prime Minister Modi will be at the United Nations headquarters. He will be leading this event. Reports say 180 countries will be participating. We're talking about diplomats, celebrities and politicians. It's a truly global event. It's been something of a pet project for the Prime Minister. He made the pitch in 2014 during his first United Nations address. Prime Minister Modi suggested that June 21st be declared International Yoga Day. The next year, in 2015, it was celebrated, and now it's catching on fast. Getting 180 countries to do anything is not easy, especially not in this political climate. It's proof of India's role in bridging differences on the global stage. And what better place to showcase that role than the United Nations? The Prime Minister also has some meetings lined up today. Around 24 people from various walks of life, businessmen like Elon Musk and scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson. But not everyone is as excited. There is one section of American society that is sulking over this visit. And who are they? Well, the usual suspects. Some American media houses and think tanks. They're not concerned about facts or realities. They just virtue signal. They build a narrative against India. Let me show you some of the examples. This is what HuffPost is running. Human rights groups blast White House for Modi visit. It says hosting Modi will send a bad message to minorities across the globe. How about that? Not even India, the whole world apparently. And here is another one from the Foreign Affairs magazine. America's bad bet on India, they say. They say New Delhi will never side with Washington against Beijing. Then you have Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. They're screening a documentary today, this one by the BBC. It's the same documentary that was blocked on social media in India. It talked about Modi's role in the 2002 riots. The courts cleared his name, but the high and mighty at the BBC did not. Either way, that documentary will be screened in American cities today. It's a protest, apparently. Last week, we also had 2 reports come out, both by this agency, the Congressional Research Service. It's a quasi-government agency here in the United States. The first report talks about India's human rights assessment. Now, I don't remember New Delhi asking for one, but that's America for you. The second report is called India-US Relations Issues for Congress. And what does this one say? That there should be scrutiny on how the White House handles India, specifically on two issues, democracy and human rights. Now, quick side note. This is the same Congress that has invited Prime Minister Modi to address it. Some of these saboteurs work online. They're trending a new hashtag, a hashtag on Twitter. This is hashtag Modi not welcome. What do all these examples tell you? There is a concerted campaign to sabotage India-US relations, to use the bogey of human rights to do this. Do you know what else it shows? It shows America's superiority complex. It's evident in all these articles and so-called op-eds. Look at the one that HuffPost published. The fact that they continue to whitewash Modi by giving him a platform is very worrying. Why does Modi need the White House for a platform? He was elected in the largest election in human history. He doesn't need a state visit for legitimacy. Now look at the foreign policy piece. India has been called a bad bet. Forget that it's a country of 1.4 billion people. Forget that it's the fifth largest economy in the world. Forget that it's a nuclear power. According to foreign policy, none of that matters. India is just a bet. And why is that? Because the article has a China filter on. We talked about this issue yesterday. Biden cannot look at the India relationship through the China prism alone. This goes beyond that. It has to. Natural allies don't need a common enemy to unite. That cannot be the only reason. They can focus on other things like trade, technology and manufacturing. But some groups here don't want that. The so-called experts say India will not help against China, so abandon it. The activists say India is autocratic and undemocratic, so sanction it. They're building a lot of pressure on President Biden. The question is, what will he do? Well, so far, he's ignored such campaigns. If you think about it, such reports and theories are not new. They've been published every year, yet Biden invited Prime Minister Modi for a state visit. I guess that's an encouraging sign. But the folks inside White House should realize something. Everyone loses patience at some point. India has voiced subtle criticism at reports emerging from here. You know the ones I'm talking about, like the notorious Religious Freedoms Report. So far, they have not heard the relationship. But what if the public opinion turns? What if such overt attempts to meddle in Indian affairs trigger public outrage? That's something the Biden team should chew on. We said natural allies don't need enemies to unite. So the question is, what do they need? Over here, most diplomats talk about one thing: shared values. These are things India and the United States have in common, like democracy or rule of law or social diversity. In the last 2 decades, we've heard a lot of this from presidents, from diplomats, and from senators. Take a look.
The partnership between the United States and India has deep and sturdy roots in the values we share.
The United States has an enormous fondness for India, partly because there's so many Indian Americans, and because of the shared values that we have.
Our two nations are united by shared values of democracy, respect for individual rights, and a shared commitment to freedom.
One of those additional elements are the values that we share, the values that are common to American democracy and to Indian democracy.
That was in the last 2 decades. But before that, things weren't so rosy. India's relationship with the US was colored by the Cold War. Washington had a strict policy then. Are you with us or against us? India refused to play that game. As a result, relations suffered. During this period, 2 events stand out. One was the 1971 war. India intervened to end Pakistan's crackdown in present-day Bangladesh. The Soviets supported us. Britain and France were indifferent. But the US actively opposed us. Then President Richard Nixon supported Pakistan. He even deployed an aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean to intimidate New Delhi. Why? Because Islamabad was mediating between the US and China. They needed Pakistan's support. So they went against India. The second instance was also in the same decade. The year was 1974. India conducted its first tests in 1974, first nuclear tests. And how did the US respond? With sanctions. The Americans hampered India's space and defense programs. Even after the Cold War, things were slow to change. In 1998, India tested another nuclear device. The Americans sanctioned again. They stopped India from securing foreign aid and loans. So the 20th century, you could say, was a lost opportunity for both the countries. India and the US were effectively rivals. Washington moved closer and closer to Pakistan in this period, so New Delhi found comfort in Moscow. So what has changed between now and then? How did we go from sanctions to state visits? Well, relations really began to improve. In the 1990s, India had opened up its economy by then, and Pakistan was less important since the Soviets were out of Afghanistan. So Washington tried to reset things. Plus, remember, the Cold War was over. The US did not have to worry about the Soviet Union. The 1998 sanctions were a setback, but a brief one, because the next year, Kargil happened. The whole world knew what Pakistan was doing. They saw Pakistan as the aggressor. So then President Bill Clinton summoned Pakistan's Nawaz Sharif. He asked Sharif to withdraw his soldiers. It was a big moment in India-US relations. In the year 2000, Clinton also visited India. It was the first visit by an American president since 1978. This was Clinton's message to the Indian Parliament. Listen to this.
So we want India to be strong, to be secure, to be united, to be a force for a safer, more prosperous, more democratic world.
His successor, George Bush, lifted the sanctions. Under Bush, we also signed the nuclear deal. So the ghosts of 1974 and 1998 were forgotten. But in the last decade, things have really picked up pace. It's not a slow reset anymore. And two reasons have contributed to that. One is the rise of China. The US knows very well what Beijing is trying to do here, to replace them as the leading power in the world. That's what China is trying to do. They also know what India brings to the table, an alternative to China in Asian dominance, sort of like a bulwark. The second reason is Pakistan's diminishing importance. Like in the 1990s, Washington has no interest in Afghanistan. So once again, Pakistan is becoming irrelevant. The question now is what comes next? The US-India relationship cannot be defined in opposition to something. In this case, it's China. The relationship must be broad. It must be evolving. I know idealism does not have a place in foreign policy, but Biden and Modi have a real shot here. This is a relationship that could define the next 100 years, that could actually help people all over the world. But are the leaders ready for that? Prime Minister Modi seems to be game. He spoke to US media ahead of the trip. He said there is, quote unquote, unprecedented trust between India and the US. He also underlined his foreign policy goal. Listen to this. Let me be clear that we do not see India as supplanting any country. We see this process as India gaining its rightful position in the world. That's what the Indian Prime Minister said. Simply put, India's time has come. It's something Bill Clinton had already accepted in the year 2000. It's time for Joe Biden to do the same. So 25 years ago, India was under US sanctions. Today, Washington is New Delhi's largest trading partner. It sounds like a drastic turn of events, but it's not really an unexpected one. You see, India-US ties are growing rapidly. At the heart of this is the economic partnership and trade. And Prime Minister Modi's visit comes at a crucial time. As I mentioned, the US is India's largest trading partner. Bilateral trade rose to $191 billion. Compare that to 2021, it was around $80 billion. In fact, India-US trade has surged by nearly 800% between 1999 and 2019. Imagine that, 800% rise. It just shows how far things have come between the two countries. And make no mistake, this is a strategic relationship. Both countries have their own agenda. They want to reduce their dependence on China. That's one of the reasons why they're together. And this cooperation becomes crucial. It's being driven by groupings like the Quad and the I2U2. The Quad has India, the US, Australia, and Japan, 4 members. I2U2 has India, Israel, that's I2, and the US and UAE, that's U2. Now, these are crucial forums for joint investments and new initiatives. Plus, there are other bilateral investments, a mammoth Boeing aircraft deal, defense deals, the crucial chip partnership. You see, chips are key to power in the 21st century. So India is pushing itself as an alternative to China. New Delhi wants to boost semiconductor manufacturing. And this is a plan that the US supports. It wants to help India. It wants to expand cooperation in emerging technologies like supercomputing and, of course, semiconductors. The idea is quite simple. Build a resilient global supply chain and reduce dependence on China. It's an ambitious goal, but one that could define our partnership. So to sum it up, bilateral trade is at a record high, investments and deals are pouring in, and we are staring at a tech partnership. It sounds almost perfect. But there are still a few issues. Even with all this, India-US trade ties are not where they should be. There is still some friction there. The US does not like India's protectionist policies, especially in terms of foreign investment. On the other hand, India says that the US is not accommodating enough. It doesn't really consider the fact that India is still a developing country. So there are differences. What is the solution? One could be the Indo Pacific Economic Framework, or the IPEF. The US could ask India to join the trade pillar. Now, let me give you some background. The IPEF was launched by the Americans in May last year. And it has 4 pillars: trade, supply chains, clean economy, and fair economy. Now, India has joined 3 pillars, but it hasn't joined the 4th one, that is trade. So Washington may want India to join it. Which brings us to the free trade agreement. There was a lot of buzz around this, but it has now fizzled out, it seems. Both India and the US have ruled out any trade deals, so an FTA may not be on the table. The other issue is trade disputes at the WTO. That's the World Trade Organization. Reports suggest that India and the US are looking at an out-of-court settlement. What does that mean? Well, the WTO is a global trade body. Currently, India and the US have 7 trade disputes there. Now, reports say they want to settle these disputes outside the court, which could mean a voluntary withdrawal of some of these cases, some or all of them. And Prime Minister Modi's visit could see a breakthrough there. Both India and the US want to reach a $500 billion mark in trade. It's a bold goal, but it's not impossible. The potential is limitless. What we need is bolder economic agendas, one that is focused on trade and technology. If India and the US want to emerge as a force, as a bulwark against China, they must strengthen their economic relationship, iron out the outstanding issues, and focus on the positives. Yesterday, we told you about the Indian diaspora in the US. Of course, Indians are by no means alone here. Over the centuries, a number of foreign communities have made their home in America, and one of those communities are the Chinese. Almost every major city in the US has what's known as a Chinatown. Chinese migrants would usually settle in these areas where they first came to the US. These Chinatowns were a way for Chinese immigrants to stay together, to keep their cultural identity alive. But over time, they have changed, sometimes because of internal factors, and at other times because of the shadowy influence of Beijing. Our next ground report is from the Chinatown in Washington, D.C. This is Washington's Chinatown. A massive friendship arch draws you in. It's about 60 feet high, with colorful dragons on the top. The streets here are very different from the rest of Washington. They look distinct. The shop fronts are more colorful. They display texts in both English and Mandarin. There's graffiti on the walls. Chinatowns in the US have existed for almost 200 years. They started popping up in the mid-1800s. The first one was built in San Francisco. The city was an unofficial entry port at the time. Thousands of Chinese citizens were leaving home. Poverty, hunger, and harsh economic conditions were forcing them out. And San Francisco gave them a new life. They found work here, in railroad construction and mining, among other fields. Soon, Chinese immigrants fanned out across the US, and Chinatowns mushroomed all over the country. The Chinese did this with little or no help from local governments. They acquired buildings. They developed business links on their own. It led to a boom in Chinatowns. The US has 50 states. At one point, it also had 50 Chinatowns. On the face of it, they may seem like just cultural hubs, a home away from home for immigrants, a safe haven, a place of comfort and security. Soon, this American model of Chinatowns was replicated across the world. Today, there are more than 100 of them in Johannesburg, in Cuba's Havana, even in Myanmar. As the network of Chinatowns grew, the Chinese community gained influence. There are more than 10 million Chinese living overseas. This makes them an important voting bloc and an influential voice. The Communist Party sees that too. They want to tap into this influence. So Beijing decided to keep an eye on Chinatowns. It started secret police stations in these overseas settlements. One was recently busted in New York. In April, the local police arrested 2 men. Turns out they operated this secret police station. It was inside Manhattan's Chinatown, inside an office building. In at least one case, this outpost helped Beijing locate a pro-democracy activist. Going by recent statements, such secret police stations exist in more than 50 countries. And in many instances, Chinese spies have set up shop in local Chinatowns. Chinatowns were supposed to be symbols of cultural unity, but they're increasingly losing their identity. The shock of the pandemic and the rapid changes in urban spaces have forced many of the original inhabitants out. Also, China's increasing efforts at meddling in the affairs of others have put these settlements at risk. Chinatowns now run the risk of becoming pawns in a larger geopolitical game. Vantage continues after a short break.
Recent fight between the two parties we had seen where Eknath Shinde and his team had boasted about the kind of international reputation that Eknath Shinde has with respect to his work schedule and how internationally several leaders were amazed by his efficiency. And so was there a slamming of Uddhav Thackeray as internationally being chosen as one of the best chief ministers when he was the chief minister. So on that background now there is this fresh war of words that has erupted. We have seen Sanjay Raut put out a fresh tweet saying that today's day should be marked as World Traitors Day in view of marking the day when all these people went away. So the war of words between both the factions continues. Today we might see some protests in some parts, especially in Pune at least, where the NCP has a stronghold. NCP itself is going to hold a protest. Later in the day, we might see protests in Mumbai as well, but there is no official word on it as of now. But continuing with...
Now, as you know, we're in Washington, D.C. It's the capital of the United States of America. It's a country that calls itself the world's oldest democracy. But the seat of power in this democracy has a dark past. Washington, D.C., like a lot of other American cities, was built on blood, sweat, and tears. Not just of the American revolutionaries, but also of slaves. Yes, the capital of the U.S., a country that styles itself as the leader of the free world, was built on the backs of the enslaved. Our next ground report looks at Washington's troubling trysts with slavery. If you take a stroll around Washington, D.C., you'll see how the past and the present converge. How old and historic sites stand next to modern structures. Some of these buildings are stories written in stone. This is the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, dedicated to the civil rights activist. He's the first African American to have a memorial in his name in this part of the capital. This is prime real estate. It's reserved for former presidents and war heroes. Martin Luther King Jr. is the first activist to be featured here. If you explore the neighborhood, you'll see that he has august company. But this city has a difficult and painful past. Many of these landmarks were built by slaves. Like the White House, it has a long history of employing slaves. The tales of the slaves at the White House are narrated here. This is a historical record of payments made by the White House to slave owners. They did not just build the presidential housing, they also served at least 10 presidents while they lived there. A former First Lady spoke about this.
I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves. And I watch my daughters, two beautiful, intelligent black young women, playing with their dogs on the White House lawn.
The White House isn't the only landmark built by slaves. Nearby is the Washington Monument. It's a hallmark of DC's skyline. It's an imposing presence. It's supposed to showcase strength. It was built to honor America's first president, George Washington. This monument, too, was built by slaves. In fact, this tale was part of a Spider-Man movie, too. In Spider-Man Homecoming, Michelle, one of the lead characters,
A very warm welcome. You're watching Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the United States. This is our special and continuous rolling coverage of Prime Minister visiting the United States. And to begin with, those are the latest live visuals that we're bringing to you of Prime Minister Narendra Modi arriving in New York City. This is St. Andrews Base, where the Indian Prime Minister has arrived. Remember, Prime Minister Modi left for the United States today in the morning, early morning of Tuesday. This is a 3-day visit for the Indian Prime Minister, and he is now finally in New York City. Important to highlight that this is the first stop for the Indian Prime Minister. He will soon be following up this visit with a visit to Washington, D.C. Remember, the first visit that Prime Minister Modi, the first event that he will be attending will be that of the International Yoga Day, which will be led by, or rather fronted by, Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Let's quickly bring in our managing editor, Zaka Jacob, who's in fact in New York City right now, and he's been covering this entire visit of the Prime Minister for us. Zaka, a very good morning to you. Good afternoon, rather. This is midday now as Prime Minister has arrived. I want to know, because you were earlier there at Times Square, what has been the sentiment like for especially the Indian American community there? What should we now expect after Prime Minister in fact lands?
So it's we're here at the Lotte Hotel, the Lotte New York Palace, where the Prime Minister will be staying. He's expected to arrive in the next hour or so. I believe you have the pictures of him landing in JFK. It would take about half an hour to 45 minutes to drive up here. He'll be staying here at the Lotte Palace, where he will be meeting a group of eclectic people. I believe Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, will be meeting him today. He'll also be meeting with some Nobel laureates, some folks from the film world. So he's going to have a series of meetings from about 4 o'clock local time. It's closer to 1 o'clock local time right now. So from about 4 till about 7:38, those are going to be his engagements today. All of these are going to be private conversations that he'll be having with these various folks. We might get some pictures via agencies. But tomorrow is the big day here in New York, because for Prime Minister Modi will be leading the Yoga Day celebrations. That's going to be a little further down on the east side at the UN headquarters, which is at Turtle Bay. At the North Lawns, he will be leading the Yoga Day celebrations. Remember, in 2015, a year after he became Prime Minister, the United Nations declared Yoga Day on the 21st of June, International Day of Yoga. And it's the first time that the Prime Minister will be leading those Yoga Day celebrations at the UN headquarters building. Like I said, it's a short drive from here on the east side in Midtown Manhattan. And then right after that, he will leave for Washington, D.C., where again, he'll be meeting with a group of CEOs and business leaders, thought leaders, and so on. Tomorrow night, which is Wednesday night, he will have a private dinner, which the Bidens will be hosting for him. And then, of course, on Thursday will be the big state visit. The morning part, the first half, will see the ceremonial welcome. It'll have the military band playing, a 21-gun salute. Then they will have the delegation-level talks and the one-on-one talks, followed by a working lunch. So that's going to be in the morning half of Thursday. And in the evening will be the state banquet, which, of course, the Bidens will be hosting for Prime Minister. I just want to show our viewers, if my cameraman Ravinder can just take out what the pictures here are. A few people have gathered, some of them from India, we are told. Some of them have come from different parts of the United States. You can see them wearing traditional Indian attire. There's a lot of dancing happening as well. So clearly for them, this is something that they've been looking forward to, the state visit. Remember, the Prime Minister has been to the United States about 6 times since 2014, but it's the first time that he is getting the highest level diplomatic honor, as it were, that any U.S. administration can give. And you can see
there's a lot of
the pomp
euphoria
and color.
and excitement.
I believe some of these folks have come from India. Some of them have come from different parts of the United States. Some of them have come by plane, some by train. 2-3 hours. I believe one lady was there who took a 9-hour train all the way from the west side and came down here to Madison Avenue to the Lotte Hotel just to meet Prime Minister Modi. So clearly it's an atmosphere of celebration, no doubt. People here, like I said, have come in large numbers. There are about 1,000 people or so. If we can go back to those pictures there, you can see how they are in a bit of a celebratory mood. The main diaspora event will happen in Washington. That's going to happen on Friday evening. That's going to be at the Reagan Building. Here in New York, like I said, once he lands, after about a couple of hours, from 4 o'clock local time, he'll be meeting with CEOs and Nobel winners and so on, economists. And then, of course, tomorrow will be the Yoga Day celebrations.
Right,
but
Zaka,
you can see
Zaka,
young and old, how people have come from near and far. Some of them even young kids, just a few months old babies, you know, a mother of two coming in a perambulator. Ma'am, these two, you've come with both your children. Where are you coming from?
I'm coming from Long Island, 66 exit.
All right, so how long? It's take a couple of hours to get here?
Yeah, in train more than 2 hours, yeah.
And you've come with your two little children. Are they also here to see Modi ji?
Yeah, Veda and Arya, yeah.
Veda and Arya.
Yeah.
Do you know who is Modi ji?
Yes.
You do?
Say, PM Modi ji. I love you, Modi ji.
You can see how young and old have come here to get a glimpse of the Prime Minister. Some of them, of course, will be going inside the hotel and they will have a chance to meet with the Prime Minister. But like I said, you can see the atmosphere here is almost celebratory. People are singing, they're dancing. And that, of course, is in keeping with how it's been during the past visits of the Prime Minister as well.
Zaka, can you hear me?
I think this is a traditional folk dance that's being performed by some of the individuals who have gathered here.
Zaka, do copy
if
you can
hear
me.
These are exciting times. Like I said, the Prime Minister has come here 6 times before, but this is the first time that he'll be getting a state visit. So we're at this place. It's on the intersection between Madison Avenue and West 50th Street in New York, in Midtown Manhattan. And the Prime Minister will be spending, as soon as he arrives here, he will be spending some time here at the hotel, meeting with CEOs and thought leaders and others. And then, of course, tomorrow, like I said, will be the main leg of his New York visit, which is that he will be taking part in the International Yoga Day celebrations.
Zaka, we just saw a lot of euphoria and excitement, in fact, gripping the entire Indian American community. You also spoke about the past visits made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and of course we've also seen the kind of grand welcome he's received by the Indian American diaspora every time he's paid a visit to the United States. In terms of the sentiment within the Indian American community, how significant is Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States? Not to forget the fact that this is a crucial year for US presidency as well, since US is all set to go to election next year. What will the Indian American voter mean for the US presidency and for this year in terms of the governance?
Well, look, I think it's slightly different from the previous administration under Trump, because Indian Americans here have not traditionally been known to be Republican voters. They generally vote Democrat. So that way, an incumbent Democratic president, it'll be okay for him because, like I said, traditionally the Indian American community here has voted for the Democrats. There are, I think, about 3.5 million. Of course, not all of them are American citizens, so not all of them can vote. But you can see, you know, how a wide-ranging and eclectic group of people here have come. Remember, non-resident Indians have constituted a significant sort of support base, definitely, of Prime Minister Modi to try and, you know, project the kind of support that he has, not just domestically in India and, of course, amongst the voters of India, but also overseas. I think there is a sense for many of the NRIs here that